Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am back with two guests that we've had on the podcast before. So we have back Arun Mehta from the Arun Mehta Show.
Hey, looking forward to maybe singing the Doug theme, maybe.
And yeah, we're gonna go for the metal version. That's exactly what's gonna happen. And also joining us for the first time in, I think it's been I don't remember the last time that you were on the podcast though. But yeah, we have back Alex DeCourville. So welcome back, Alex.
My dreams were my ticket out.
And today we're going to be discussing about one of the three Nicktoons that celebrated its 30th anniversary on August 11th, 1991. We're going to be talking about Doug, created by Jim Jenkins. Now, before we continue on with the discussion, I want to say, I want to do a shout out to Abdullah and Paul from yesterday's Capers. They're a podcast that look back on three different shows and talk about how each of them are similar and different at the same time. Unfortunately, they couldn't join us because their great uncle has passed away, and they weren't able to join us because of that reason. So I'm actually going to leave a link in the description below for you to check out the podcast that we did on yesterday's Capers discussing about both Doug, The Weekenders, and Hey Arnold. So please go check it out. And I'm sure that, once things are a little bit more settled in, we'll definitely have them on board as guests on a podcast. But in the meanwhile, we will be discussing about Doug. The show is about a young boy named Doug Funny who moves in with his family to a small town called Bluffington, and he interacts with various people. He has his best friend, Skeeter Valentine, Chunky Studebaker, Connie Benj. He has a crush on a girl named Patty Mayonnaise. There's the bully Roger, and he just goes through his everyday life and writing it all down on his journal. He has various dream sequences where he imagines himself as various characters from Race Canyon or Quailman, and he goes through school situations, he goes through everyday life problems, and the show just recently celebrated its 30th anniversary, and it's actually kind of funny because a lot of people see Doug as one of two camps. They either love the show because they grew up watching it and they see it as like a pinnacle of slice of life animation, and then there's some who find it to be incredibly boring and bland, and other slice of life cartoons that came out afterwards were able to improve on the formula of Doug. So before we go into that discussion, I'd like to know from you guys, how did you first learn about Doug?
So it was at the very beginning when Nickelodeon obviously was going into transition, and so basically, for those of the people who do not know, Nickelodeon, Doug was pretty much part of like the Three Musketeers, if you will, of the primordial ooze that basically became what was going to be a very dominating time for Nickelodeon up until the cartoons started coming in for Cartoon Network. So the first three that came into existence was obviously Rocko's Modern Life, Ren and Stimpy, and obviously the one we're talking about today, Doug. So,
well, there's also Rugrats too.
Well, Rugrats came a little later on, didn't it?
No, they both aired on the same day. Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy all aired the same day. Rocko's Modern Life didn't air until about a year later.
Oh, was it? Okay. Okay. I apologize then. So, so the original Three Musketeers was the Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, and obviously Doug. So, and then Rugrats Modern Life came a little later on. But my understanding of how Doug came about was Jim Jenkins was just he was working at PBS, and that was where he cut his teeth, and he was basically just sketching what would be the characters that we're going to be talking about today. And little did he know that he pitched it to Nickelodeon, and all of a sudden, that's all these sketches that he was doing just for the fun of it. He ended up making a cartoon show out of it. So, it was I guess it was a labor of love, I guess you could say, for Doug's existence.
Yeah. So Jim was actually working at Nickelodeon around the 70s. He was helping with a show called Pinwheel, which was kind of like a lower budget Sesame Street, essentially. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that was like the basic premise of it. And so, he worked on and off in various, things over the years. Like he was writing, he was doodling. And then eventually when he went through like a major depressive point in his life, that was when he started doing his first series of books, focusing on Doug. The first one is Doug's Got a Brand New Pair of Shoes. And that was, that would eventually lead into an early episode of the series. And so he showed it off over to Vanessa Coffey, who was the executive producer of the Nicktoons at the time. And out of the 8 pilots that were featured on Nickelodeon, Doug was the first one that was ever picked up. She loved it. She loved the fact that it was kind of like a next generation Peanuts. Doug was essentially like Charlie Brown and going through his everyday struggles. And so that was essentially why people, including Vanessa Coffey and a lot of the executive producers of Doug, fell in love with it in the first place.
Yeah, well, if you remember, Patricia, I mean, Doug, as we said so many times on Arun and Patricia and the various other casual chats, Doug was, the start of the slice of life genre, pretty much. So, it was so significant. Dare I say, it's probably just as significant as the Flintstones was, when that first started out. Flintstones was the first ever cartoon to appear on television, pretty much. And so, but I mean, the actual, the cartoon, kind of like thing was that, oh, here's wacky situation, maybe family, and then later on after that, it turned into, oh, hey, here's these teens with either this dog ghost or, speed buggy or whatever, and then they are solving mysteries, cartoons at that time didn't really put you in a believable setting. Pretty much. And so, but then all of a sudden came Doug, and he was kind of like, oh, hey, this is a normal everyday kid, going through a normal situation that I'm sure a lot of people went through because, during that time, a lot of, maybe even still now, a lot of people move from state to state, and, jobs change, and, things change, and friends change, and, it's a thing that people go through. And Doug, I think, encapsulated that, at least at the beginning of the first season, where, he was moving to Bluffington, and he was a fresh new start, new friends, new school, whole new adventure for him. And, he tells it pretty much all through his journal that he keeps. And the journal ends up being kind of like being the story driver throughout the entire show.
Right, exactly. How about you, Alex? How did you first learn about Doug?
Doug is one of those shows where it was ever present for me. It came out when I was young enough that I pretty much don't remember life without it. I remember some of the later episodes being new, but for the most part, I just don't remember life without it. It was just there from the beginning for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think during that time, I mean, this was at the time when, cable and satellite television was becoming more prevalent. I mean, unless you had syndication around the country, you didn't really have anything. So I think, there's only very few shows that ever, were ever brought to syndication. And so Doug and, cable television and, satellite TV, I think changed the game pretty much. It gave the platform of oh, hey, here's this dish or here's this cable you have under the ground, and here's all this stuff that comes through it. And Doug was one of those things. But I think at that time, it was very limited because a lot of these, Nickelodeon itself was even kind of just, rehashing some of the other shows. And also it was also paying other companies from to produce whatever they were already producing already. So for example, you had Danger Mouse and the Avenger Penguins and Count Duckula, I think were also were prevalent at Nickelodeon at the time. And so I think, Doug was obviously, one of the very few newer things that was there at the time. And I think it wouldn't really until we got right into maybe 93, 94, 95 I think it's all, we really started to see, more of a collection of cartoons that we can, so I think when you ask a lot of young people, there were a lot of people in their 30s, going into their 40s, he's like, hey, what were the cartoons that were, very prevalent in your childhood? I guarantee you, were Doug, Ren and Stimpy, Rocko's Modern Life, Rugrats, Hey Arnold, like all these early cartoon shows that really set the game, I think were the ones that you'll definitely hear answers about. For definite.
Right. Now, I know for you, Alex, this was a huge influence on yourself, especially with your writing, because I remember years ago when we were doing the Manic Expression podcast plays that you kind of based Robert Tolkien, kind of like the formula of it around Doug.
Yeah, Doug was a huge influence on those stories and my writing. And one thing I find kind of funny is after the movie came out, I've gotten into the Timmy Failure books, and it's like, oh great, once I publish these, people are going to accuse me every which way of ripping those off. But yeah, Doug was definitely a big influence on those, and sort of a slice of life, but having a character with just this wild imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and for me, that's one of the reasons Doug does connect. That's one of the reasons Doug connected with me as a kid, and I think it's one of the reasons I look back at so fondly now. Like, Doug was one of the few shows that looked at the neurotic side of being a kid. Having such an active imagination that you can just imagine the best and worst case scenario of every situation.
Absolutely. You have episodes where Doug is just very fearful about him being a loser in front of all of his friends, family, and colleagues. And then you have memories. You have like flashbacks and imaginations of him being with Patty, or, him fighting off against Roger as Quailman or Mr. Bone. And all of those really just gravitated to like all of these sequences that a lot of people remember. They remember fondly just as much as like the story of Doug itself, the imagination scenes. That's where they always remember people such as Quailman and Race Canyon and Smash Adams, because those characters are fun, and you could be able to think of anything, like anything that Doug can think of in scenarios that are fun or even realistic. People were like, yeah, I thought about that at one point. I thought I was going to be the loser in front of my school if I didn't get a good grade, or I thought I was going to be, kind of like the dweeb if I didn't impress this person that I really liked. So yeah, I think that with Doug being able to showcase that, we were able to get into a psyche of his, of his perspective. And I think that's what a lot of people really just drew into him.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that comes to mind is that I never really understood the hunker burger kind of like deal. Like, you have to say the certain things to like order certain food.
Well, here's the thing, Aaron. I know you're from the UK, and I don't know how certain hangout joints work around your area, but especially in certain parts of America, and we're talking about that Doug was based off of Jim Jenkins' life, and he grew up in the 50s in Richmond, Virginia. So we can assume that it was kind of like a callback into they would hang out in the burger joint, and they would be listening to music, and they would be hanging out and talking to each other. So that's kind of like what it was. I don't know what the British equivalent would that be.
We just ordered food.
You didn't go to a particular place after school with your friends, like to get a bite to eat or something?
No, we just went to the chip shop and just ordered, fish and chips.
Okay, so I'm sure
I'm stereotypically British, aren't I, everybody? So, but no, it's I thought he was kind of like making fun of the fact that McDonald's, you have to see muck in front of everything, it was just there was Big Macs and McNuggets and things like that.
No, that's not what it was. But
okay then.
Yeah, I guess maybe if Doug was in the UK, maybe they would go, instead of the honker burger, they would go over to a chip shop and just hang around and listen to music in the background and just talk.
Oh, good grief! If Doug was done in the UK, it'd be a miserable thing. It really would.
Really? How so?
Yeah. I don't know. It'd always be raining in the show.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, that's basically the equivalent of it. It's you see, Bluffington was kind of like a small town, everybody knows your name kind of appeal, where all the neighbors knew each other, everybody knew each other in school, and hanging out at the Clover Mall, and going over to Sitson's Pond and going over to Lucky Duck Lake, and all of these locations are very simple, but they're very identifiable, especially for like people who lived in like the suburban areas. I guess think of it like a more suburban take on Hey Arnold, where in Hey Arnold it was more urbanized, where Bluffington was more like a quaint, simple reminder of like how things were back in the day. I mean, I'm sure that with Jim drawing in his memories.
That's a good shout actually, because Bluffington, I mean, like it was only like a small place, wasn't it? Because I think wasn't Doug coming like from like a bigger city? If I recall.
I don't know actually. I mean, we never knew about what Bloatsburg was. I mean, we've heard it mentioned a couple of times in both the original Doug and in Disney's Doug, but yeah, like Bloatsburg, we don't really know anything about. I mean, we just think it's
probably
like,
pretty. Well, I think it's in the name. I think it's pretty bloated.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's the case. Maybe it is a bigger city, and then they just moved over to a smaller location. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Wasn't it because his dad changed jobs and like he became like a photographer?
Yeah, he worked in he was a photographer and he worked over at a photo shop.
Yeah, so that was the reason why they moved over. So I mean, like I think again, like going back to like the whole premise of the show, like Doug moving into a new place for the first time, having to like rediscover who he is and like where he sits in this world. I think it's the episodes are really like having to obviously having to stand up with Roger, then obviously there's Paddy like dealing with the crush of the first time, and then there's dealing with his very creative sister, and obviously then there's episodes around Pork Chop too, like, and then he's also got his neighbor Mr. Dink, who's a crazy inventor. So
yes.
like, I mean, yeah.
Now I'd like to know from all of you guys, who's your favorite character?
That's a great question. Like, I always like Paddy Mayonnaise. She's like, I know sometimes she can be a bit bratty at times, and definitely she was a bit intolerable, like in Disney's Doug. But I actually did like Paddy, and Skeeter was pretty cool too. I just like how he was like, he had this happy-go-lucky kind of like aspect on life, and he likes to get himself into twisted situations pretty much. So like, and that was how he overreacted to things as well. Like there was a whole episode about him overreacting to the fact that he thought he was moving away, and he was just at the fact that he was moving into his basement.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that one. So yeah, Skeeter's a fun character. Paddy I like as well, and yeah. Characters I probably least like probably Mr. Bone. I didn't really like Mr. Bone all that much.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and then BB Bluff obviously was she was your spoiled rich kid as well, which I don't really like those characters.
Yeah, BB would kind of like be the archetype of all the stereotypical rich characters that we would see in slice of life cartoons for the next decade. Like,
no, she's probably I would argue that probably she's not as bad as Rhonda. I disagree. She's actually worse than Rhonda. Rhonda's not as bad as BB Bluff, and some of the other characters.
Rhonda learned her lesson every now and then.
She did, but I don't know. She just the times until she learned that lesson, she was pretty intolerable.
Yeah, that is a big difference in characters. Rhonda learned her lesson a little more often, but in between her lesson, she was much crueler.
Yeah. How about you, Alex?
Picking one character is tough. Like Roger Klotz was always so entertaining. For me, it's like this is one of the big reasons Doug is such a comfort show. It's like I wish the bad actors and annoying people of my life were only as bad as Roger Klotz. Skeeter was always funny. Mr. Dink pretty much always owned whatever scene he was in, like anytime he came in, he was always funny with those crazy items.
Yeah, like where did he get the money for all the items that he would purchase? I mean, I know that DINK stands for double income, no kids, which is why him and Mrs. Dink are called that, because they have no children, so they can be able to buy all this stuff. It's like, at some point, how much did Mrs. Dink have to deal with the fact that her husband is spending like their retirement fund and whatever that they could to pay the mortgage so that he can buy whatever expensive things that was going to blow up in his face?
Well, like if he's got money to burn, he's going to burn it, isn't he? So like, she's always nonchalant about it, probably. And that's the thing about Mrs. Dink. She really is. She just kind of goes with the flow. I mean, she doesn't really become very active in the show until like she runs for mayor.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, even like in the first episode where we see them together and then, Mr. Dink was just trying to be really, really romantic. It's like, you remember the first day that we met and you remember what I asked, what your first words were to me. And then, she says, yes, dear, it was get off of my foot. So yeah, that's really romantic right there.
Yeah. It's like, I know she's like a more pleasant version of Ross from Monsters, Inc. How fun would it be if she was Rosalind? Mr. Ding would something would blow up in his face, and she'd be like, there she goes again.
Oh, jeez, no. We're gonna connect Bluffington over to Monstropolis. I mean, this is our cinematic universe, people. Anyway, but yeah, as for my favorite characters, that's really hard considering that. I mean, I know that on face value, they seem like just one note characters that are just built on cliches, but they're done pretty well, especially at the time. My favorite characters were always Judy. I just love just how incredibly overdramatic she is with her love of Shakespeare and thinking that everything was so passe and bohemian. Another character that I really like is Skeeter, obviously, because he was just so fun and he was so whimsical. Patty's a great character. I actually have a story about this. So you guys know my name is Patricia. And I was called Patty. I mean, I still am technically because my friends and family and they call me that. But most people call me Patricia. I stuck to it because there was around college. There were two Patricias and I decided to keep that. And then the other person was called Patty. So when I was a kid and Doug was really popular on TV, I was consistently teased and made fun of. I was either called Peppermint Patty or Patty Mayonnaise, and I hated it so much. I was being bombarded with it, just constantly teased. I mean, a certain critic that we don't talk about when he said, oh, now I know exactly what, it meant when people made fun of me for Doug. It's like, yeah, I know what that's like because I went through it. I went through it multiple times. I was called Patty Mayonnaise. I was called Patty LaBelle. I was called a whole bunch of names, but Patty Mayonnaise just stuck for at least maybe about 3 or 4 years of my elementary school life until I moved over to New York. And that was when Doug was in the Disney version and pretty much nobody talked about it anymore. Everybody talked about either Recess or Hey Arnold. So I was safe from that, but it just consistently stuck to me. And, when I was a kid, I hated the character of Patty Mayonnaise because I was being made fun of. I mean, at school, I didn't have any friends. And so they made fun of me just for being mean to me. So the fact that I was watching a show that had a character of a show that I liked and people were just making fun of that, I kind of removed myself from it. But then when I, removed that part of my life and then I started rewatching the show again, I actually really like Patty as a character. She's the athlete and she's very sweet and kind to Doug. She's always helpful to him. And, especially when we go to the Disney incarnation, she has a really sad backstory. We find this out in a later episode of the Nickelodeon version that her mom had passed away and that it was her and her father who were together. She died in a car accident and the car accident left her father in a wheelchair. And so I thought that episode was really, really impactful, and they wouldn't go exploring this until the Disney version, which we'll get to in a moment. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things about Patty that I really liked as a character, and I thought that she was great. And Mr. Dink is always a highlight as well, where he's always funny and he always has some of the best lines, like "You broke my grill" and very expensive and stuff like that. So I think that looking back on Doug, everybody praises Billy West's performance as both Doug and Roger. And, I do too, but we see, a lot of people seem to overlook just the amazing stuff that Fred Newman was able to do for the show. So Fred Newman, he plays Mr. Dink, he plays Porkchop, and he also did the mouth sounds for the sound effects for the show and helped with the music alongside with the main composer. And they do a very interesting take on a soundtrack for music. It's not like your typical orchestral music or rock music that you would expect in a lot of cartoons at the time. It was very quirky, very off-putting, very interesting, very idiosyncratic. It was different, and even still to this day, it's still different. I cannot think of any soundtrack that is like Doug other than Doug. I mean, sure, the Disney version.
If you notice in the show, it was also, I mean, I'm not saying that most other cartoons haven't probably done it, but if you notice that in the show, certain instruments are kind of implemented for particular characters. So, for example, Doug obviously has like has that like the what's it? Well, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's basically making the mouth of the sounds and clicking.
It's a banjo.
No, not banjo, but like they do like doing like the sounds with like your fingers, and like your
mouth okay,
like
gotcha.
Yeah, doing like all that. So that's associated with Doug. But then when Roger Klotz comes in, like you hear the electric guitars, you hear like the grunge and everything like that. You like and then when Patty comes on the screen, you just hear like this this kind of like beautiful whimsical, pretty much, and like that she has every character has their own musical aura.
Yeah, and Dan Sawyer even mentioned that in the if you guys know, you guys probably already know this from many years ago, but Matthew Klickstein, he wrote a book called Slimed, the origins of Nickelodeon history. And I went over to a live performance where he was promoting the book, and he brought in a lot of the people that he interviewed, including Dan Sawyer and Fred Newman. And when they were performing their music, he talked about how each character had their own distinct theme songs, and he picked up his guitar and he picked up his ukulele and he just played off the theme songs of every person. He played Roger's theme song, he played Patty's theme song, Dan and Fred, they did the Judy's theme song by whistling and snapping their fingers. So every person has their own distinct theme song. You're right.
Yeah, and like this is still done today. Like if you notice, we're currently covering the Owl House in another podcast, and when Amity Blight comes onto the screen, that he's already the music starts to change, and like you hear this kind of like these kind of like chiming sounds, and like this kind of other aura that comes along, and they're still doing it today. So like I tell you what, I prefer that. As a method of like bringing characters into the fold, and bringing characters in and doing like the whole storytelling aspect of that, rather than like what they're doing on Simpsons, where it's just like da 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 da, and then Homer injures himself somehow. Like it's I just love like when the whole atmosphere, the musical accompaniments complements characters and gives them a purpose to complements them being on the screen.
Yeah,
pretty
exactly.
Much. Yeah.
All right, so characters out of the way. Oh yeah, I forgot about Fred Newman. So Fred Newman, in addition to like all of his mouth sounds and all the music, he was able to perform as Skeeter and Mr. Dink and Porkchop in just really fun, unique ways. And I think that he was the one that kind of like held the show together. I mean, I know a lot of people say Billy West did because he played as both Doug and Roger, but I think that Fred Newman definitely brought the quirkiness that was kind of lacking if you were to take Skeeter, Mr. Dink, and Porkchop out of it. And I think that without Fred, Fred is his own unique character. He did a lot of voiceover roles, and he did a lot of sound effects in Prairie Home Companion, and he even was hired to like do various effects in movies and TV shows. So yeah, seriously, I would highly recommend that you just check out some of Fred Newman's performances in Prairie Home Companion. Just see how incredibly versatile he is. He's definitely a very underrated actor, especially since you have people like Billy West about and doing their own amazing performances. So yeah. Anyway, so going into...
I'm really glad they went with Fred Newman and not Randy Newman.
I wonder how that would have been for like the theme song of Doug. Here's Doug, and he's living his normal life.
You pay Randy now.
Okay. Moving on. So episodes. What are your guys' favorite episodes?
Dare I say, I think obviously when Skeeter moves away, that episode was pretty gripping actually, because it's kind of like, oh wow, like they're actually having Skeeter leave the show, and like and then all of a sudden like you come in and like, oh wow, he actually isn't there. He is there. He's just moved into his basement. So that's even though he was No, that was a pretty gripping episode. Also, the one there was a Christmas episode as well when Porkchop was in danger of being put to sleep because they suspected that he attacked BB Buff. In actual fact, he was trying to save her from falling into the thin ice, which she stupidly ends up doing anyway in the climax of the episode. So and also there's the one where where Judy hijacks the Bluffington pageant, and so halfway through the show, and she's like the new age version of telling of like the founding of the town, and that whole episode too. So there's many to count, and it annoys me when people say, oh, it's Doug is boring, but when you really delve deep and you actually look at some of the episodes that are really kind of like grab your attention, like there are some good ones in there. Don't knock the entire show. There are some things in there that actually are worth paying attention to.
Yeah. How about you, Alex?
If I had to single out one favorite episode, it would be when Doug thinks his bike has been stolen. I mean, I said before, a big appeal of Doug is just like, having the imagination to imagine the worst case scenario of every situation. And something, when I was that age, something similar did happen. It actually happened to my brother. His bike was stolen, and just seeing Doug's paranoia and the fact and watching this normally mild-mannered character just go off the deep end, when he just he doesn't get that his friends are just being sarcastic when they're talking about stealing bikes, and the security scene with Mr. Dig when Dig asks him, "Are you insane?"
Yeah.
Here's the thing, I'm just watching, looking on IMDb on all the episode scores, and you should actually, it's quite amazing. There's not a bad episode.
I guess it depends because some people feel that the first season episodes were a bit rough, and some people think that the last season episodes were kind of like when the show was like running out of ideas. And I think that, with the first and fifth seasons, I guess it's kind of like Hey Arnold, in which the first season, they were trying to, get their groove in. They were trying to find out what worked and what didn't. And I guess a lot of people, they felt that the fifth season was kind of like, okay, we're getting into the end. We can see that. And, the episodes are just not as gripping as the ones for the previous seasons, which I definitely agree with the first season's mentality. Last season, I think that there are some pretty decent episodes, like the episode where Doug graduates from Bluffington School and goes over to BB Bluff Middle School. The fact that, he's afraid of change, and, he's wondering about, what does the principal look like, and, trying to do one final thing right before he leaves. And we even get that moment with Roger saying, I've been in this school, and, I don't know how I feel now that I'm going to be graduating. So yeah, it definitely does show off the fear of graduating and expecting big changes. But if I had to choose a few episodes that I really do enjoy with Doug, I mean, any episode that features Quailman or any or Smash Adams or Race Canyon, those are always highlights for me personally. Any episode with the Beats is a major highlight for me. I think that they're one of the greatest fictional bands that ever featured. And even though they've only performed 3 songs in the entire series, they're songs that are memorable. Everybody remembers Killer Tofu. Everybody remembers I Need More Allowance. Everybody remembers Shout Your Lungs Out. And they're great. They're a great band. And when we saw in the Disney version that they broke up in the first episode, a lot of people were genuinely upset.
Yeah, that was the most wrong note you could potentially put in was breaking up the Beats. Pretty much yeah, it was also I think one episode that gets a lot of attention, and let's face it, every episode that has potential shipping in it, I think obviously clinches at the heartstrings of pretty much every fan of any show. But
I know what you're referring to. It's Doug and Patty sitting on a tree, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes. That episode where it's they're studying are they actually dating or not, and it's that's one thing I do like about Doug's crush on Patty is that it is pretty genuine when you look at it. Yeah, it's played for laughs, but in occasions, but it does tease there is a connection between the two.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that at some point everybody and this is based off of a crush that Jim had when he was a preteen, where he met up with a girl and he really, really liked her, and he would get nervous around her. So those were based off of actual childhood memories that Jim had. And even the characters, there was a character that was really based off of Skeeter. There was a character that was really based off of Chalky. There was a character that was really based off of Roger. All of these people were based off of Jim's life, and they all were portrayed in the show. And that's why all of these scenarios that you see on the show, they felt genuine because they were genuine.
Did Jim's crush finally fall in love with him after he proved that was a lake monster?
Well, actually, no. Believe it or not, he even mentioned that. Well, I guess we'll get to this at the end of the show, but no, Jim unfortunately never got to marry the girl that was based off of Patty Mayonnaise. So he did.
Well, Doug never did in the show either. So
exactly, yeah. So I guess I could mention this, but I interviewed Jim a few years ago, and he did tell me that if they ever did bring Doug back, that Doug and Patty wouldn't get together. So yeah, I'm sorry, everybody who wanted to have Doug and Patty together. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's like the Wonder Years. It's like, we wanted to see Kevin and Winnie together, but then at the end of the episode, in the end of the series, they don't end up together. They have separate families. So it's like, it's based off of real life. It's like, you have that crush once upon a time and you fall in love with them. But then, when you grow up, you move on and you do different things and you just stay together as friends, or you don't even see them again. And then you meet somebody else who's just as wonderful. So
yeah, but it does throw open, like, who would Doug end up in the end?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. We'll discuss about this a little later on, but yeah, I want to go over to some other things. So what is it about Doug, in your personal opinion, that especially for those who've never seen it or just maybe like seen reviews of it saying, oh, Doug is boring and bland? Like, what do you take out of Doug that is still going to be, recommended for people to check out even 30 years after it aired?
Well, I mean, like, if you're a fan of animation, I mean, Doug has to be one of the shows you have to check out because, like, all the shows that came after it, like even Hey Arnold and most of the other, slice of life cartoons, I mean, wouldn't necessarily be around unless Doug, was a success. And it was a success. It was renewed, for multiple seasons. So, like, so I think for anybody who is a massive fan of, the Nickelodeon and, times and, all the times in the 90s, if you haven't watched Doug yet, then what are you doing? I would definitely urge people to check this out and, get acquainted with it because, you'll notice that it actually, sets the, it basically puts in the bricks in the yellow brick road for all the other cartoon shows to dance down to, so.
How about you, Alex?
Well, as I've said before, the two of the big things are capturing that neurotic side of being a kid, where you just imagine the worst or even best case scenarios of every situation, but also, it's a good comfort show. It's a good comfort show. Like I said before, like, wouldn't it be great if all these different, what a lot of people have called a 5-token band, if all these archetypes actually did get along and, like this, like someone like Roger really was like as bad as it got in my life. And not to mention, I still genuinely find the show funny. And, there is they did make occasional pop culture references, but they kept them to a minimum. So the show definitely feels timeless.
Yeah.
Well, also kind of capturing that time, like, how many kids are going to go to how many kids are going to go hang out at a mall nowadays?
That is very true, so especially since malls have been shutting down left and right like crazy. And also, they have places like the arcade, and you have places like even like with, Doug's dad, who worked at a photo shop where he would develop photos. I mean, unfortunately, nowadays with like digital cameras, that job has become pretty much obsolete.
Right. I know some people who still, like, I do in fact know some people, like professionals, who do use like film cameras, but they are rare. Like you pretty much have to be a professional to still use that sort of thing.
Exactly. Like I'm in the communications major at my school, and there's a photography class that I do know of who I do know some students who take, and some of them still do use film. And there's a dark room in the school, I think. I just never been there because I didn't have to take those classes. But yeah, for the most part, if they're not using film, then they're doing digital, and it's much easier and much more cheaper to do than just going over to a dark room and having to get the camera film out and dipping it into the chemicals and making sure that everything is right and hoping that none of the light goes in, otherwise your shots will be ruined. So yeah, definitely in our year of 2021, where people are have access to cameras with their phones, yeah, something like there have been cases in which I've gone to like a Walgreens or a Walmart or any of those places where they do have like a photo session, and you get to plug in your phone so you can access pictures, and you can actually print them out physically. But for the most part, yeah, the times of film, especially like that, doesn't exist anymore. And even with like the stuff that they did with like, kids, running around and going to the parks and riding their bikes. I mean, there are a lot of suburban areas that still do that. I mean, I live in a small town in Alabama, and I still see, this is like pre-COVID, where I still saw people like riding their bikes in the park and having rollerblades and stuff like that. But when I was living in Florida, I didn't really see that much anymore. I mean, I could assume because it was really hot and, kids wouldn't be going outside like that. But for the most part, nowadays, I mean, a lot of kids would be playing video games, and a lot of kids would like be on their phones, or, like interact via social media. I mean, the closest thing that I did see that was the episode where Doug gets a Super Nintendo, and he's obsessed with this video game that he's just constantly playing it for hours and hours and hours, and he neglects on writing his book report about silt. So yeah, episodes will be definitely leaning more towards that if Doug ever gets like a reboot or something. But yeah, I think that with the simpler times that Doug was able to showcase, I mean, it does, you're right, Alex, it does definitely feel like it does call into the particular time period that the show was released. But at the same time, because there's not a lot of pop culture references, and because there's a lot of relatability with like kids going through everyday scenarios, like whether it be body issues when Doug puts on a few pounds, and because he was visiting his grandmother and she was treating him nicely, and he had to go to a pool party, and he was afraid of what he would look like because he gained a bigger gut. And then there's also the episode where Doug has issues. He had a fear of a letter that came in, and he was hoping that it wouldn't be anything too fearful because he was afraid of being in trouble because he was struggling with math. And then there was one episode where he was like afraid for eating liver and onions when Patty invites him over to a dinner party. So yeah, there's a lot of genuine everyday fears that a lot of kids go through, and it still is relevant if you were to watch it. I mean, there was even this great episode of the Nickelodeon animation podcast with Hector Navarro, where he brought Jim along, and Jim was was discussing about like how sometimes he would go over to various schools and he would teach kids about drawing. And he decided to and then the teacher was asking, so kids, how many of you guys know about Doug? And he was nervous, saying, oh man, we have like a bunch of third graders. And this interview was like around 2012 or 13. So this was like over 20 years after Doug premiered, and he was afraid that, okay, nobody's going to know about it. But no, half the kids in the school knew about Doug because they were introduced to it through, watching it on the 90s or All That, which, nowadays is known as Nick Rewind. They knew about it because the show was on DVD and it was on streaming services, and, their older siblings or their parents would introduce them to Doug because of how timeless it is. And yeah, I mean, even still to this day, there are still a generation of kids who know about Doug.
I mean, like, isn't that? I mean, I don't want to say it's an absolute damning indictment of like modern day cartoons, because there are still some good shows out there. But I mean, like, the fact that even kids today would still tell you, oh, hey, I've watched Doug and one of the classic Nicktoon shows, and I like it more than some of the other shows that are currently on TV right now. I mean, like, it just shows how much of a golden generation our time was. We tune in and we would watch these shows, and it would be a point where we would barely leave the TV because every time a Doug episode ended, we'd have something else to look forward to. Mm-hmm. It's not like what it is today, and the fact that even current generations are still like looking at the cartoons going by and say, hey, this is something I can sit down and invest in, even though it's like 20 or 30 years old. It's like what does this say about modern cartoons today?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know that modern cartoons get away with a lot more things that they did back then in terms of what kind of stories that they could tell, what kind of representation there was, or maybe even violence. So I'd say that it's different. I would say that, cartoons today, they did get a lot of away with a lot of things. And, there's obviously, due to censorship, but then there's some things that, you couldn't even do today. Like imagine an episode about Doug where maybe a character was going through like LGBT issues, or imagine an episode about Doug, going even further into body issues. Like, I mean, they try to do this in the Disney version where, Patty was essentially going through like bulimia, but that wasn't exactly played off like very well. And we'll discuss about that in just a moment. But yeah,
I just think the thing with I think the thing with animation, at least at the time, I think I don't know how much represents, like, I mean, we can talk about like the Owl House, and we can talk about Yashiro, Princess of Power, and we talk about like various other shows that have this representation. But the reason they have this representation is because there's people within it that actually are living that. And so, they live that through the show. So, and that's what makes it so unique, and what makes it done right. I mean, again, I don't know, like the whole, and I don't want to start guessing, like, the sexual orientation, like everyone in the cast and crew of Doug, but I don't know, like, I think if there was something like that, going on at the time, I don't know. I think there would have been like something that would have been like done for. I mean, like in regards to like the whole let's face it, Disney Doug was not as great as like the Nickelodeon Doug. So of course there's gonna be wrong things in that. But I mean, so that wouldn't surprise me if they messed up the bulimia angle. But I mean, like I don't know, like yeah, you're right. There was a lot that we couldn't get away with in earlier shows. But like even then with those restrictions, they still hold up.
Yeah, and also, going back into representation again, I mean, yes, Jim's idea of representation was very different. Like, you notice that all the characters have like green and blue and purple skin. I mean, if you didn't know this by watching the show, I mean, how would you know that Skeeter is African American? You wouldn't, unless, of course, you were to hear in an interview from Jim where he talks about that, or, if you were like a gigantic nerd like us, where we kind of like do this kind of research. But yeah, I mean, there's like I remember Pushing Up Roses did a video many years ago where she discussed about the history of Doug, and she talked about the early reasons on why why Jim and David Campbell did the colors of the different skins was because they were drunk and they were drinking like multiple colored drinks, and they decided to just like, hey, let's just draw these characters in different colors. But nowadays the reason why they claim it was because we wanted to show all the different colors of the rainbow, and that it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, it matters what you are on the inside, and this is how we got our representation out. Which I made a video about this a few years ago about like the 5 things that Hey Arnold was able to improve over Doug. And representation and at the time for Doug was okay, but Hey Arnold was able to expand it. And like we said before, even shows like Amphibia and the Owl House were able to expand it even more, where we have main characters who are Thai and Chinese and German and Dominican and various others. So yeah,
I mean, if we had to, in regards to representation, I mean, like, keep this in mind, like Doug was set in a small town, where I could probably imagine where, yes, there would have been some people who would have come from different backgrounds, but not very many people.
Yeah, that's very true.
Where there was Hey Arnold was basically, a mixture of like New York City and like various other big cities, like all mixed together, like and so as you probably imagine, there's probably going to be a ton of like representation that's going to be in that show.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I live in Alabama. I'm like about 6 hours away from Virginia, and yeah, it's true when it comes to representation. I mean, I come from a school where it's mostly African American, and we have a few Hispanics there, and we have some white people there, and even like people from all over the world, like in Europe and in Asia. But yeah, I mean, that's for the school. But as for the town itself, no, not really. I mean, I'm sure, Alex, I'm sure the same thing for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, my town, I live in a pretty small town, and I'm sorry to say that it wasn't the most diverse growing up. Like, there was such a lack of diversity that I kid you not, they asked me to play a Puerto Rican when we did Up the Down Staircase when I was in high school.
Oof. Wow.
Wow.
And Aaron,
I don't want to explore that anymore, just in case we get flagged for YouTube on this. I don't
Fair enough. And Aaron, but yours is a different situation because you have pretty much all of Europe, as diversity.
But not even that, like, keep in mind, like, we were the center of the British Empire. So, like, for me, like, I'm half Indian and half English. So, like, and like, we have various other people who have, who had, from British territories who had come over here as well after, the empire collapsed. So, like, it's, you can probably imagine, we have lots. This country here in Britain is like pretty much, nearly a representation of a lot of people around the world. Like we have all sorts of people here. Like it's the idea that we wouldn't have representation, and I think our cartoons, at least when Doug was around, we were more animal based. I think in our cartoons, we had Bangers and Mash, we had we had the Avenger Penguins, we had Count Duckula. That was kind of like I think anthropomorphic animals played a significant role in British cartoons. Pretty much. I think the only people I think who are really I can recall from back in the time was probably Dennis the Menace when they had his animated show, and also when he had his own shtick on the children's channel.
Well, let me ask you something, Aaron. I mean, did you even get the Charlie Brown and Snoopy show in the UK?
Oh, we did. Yeah, it was that was a thing. So, but in regards to other shows that I can recall, I'd have to we would have to kind of like sit down with every single British TV show and kind of like talk them out.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Animals were a big thing. The rainbow was a big thing, and not the LGBTQ rainbow I'm talking about, but like a rainbow as in TV show.
Gotcha.
But and also the Muppets were huge as well at that point.
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, like around in America, other than the Charlie Brown and Snoopy show, there wasn't really a lot of like focusing on kids. I mean, other than like Dennis the Menace, and I think around the same time you had the Problem Child animated series when the movie came out, and then there was also like a focus on like, hey, let's have these cartoons based off of toys. I mean, that's the thing that we need to like appreciate what Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy was. I mean, especially with Doug, because out of all the Nicktoons, Doug was the one that never got like a toy. They didn't get toys or any merchandise. I mean, they did get a few VHS tapes, but it wasn't until the Disney version where they actually did get a slew of toys and action figures. So, I mean,
I'm trying to remember when Nickelodeon started merchandising, because I don't think in the very early stages, I don't think they actually did. I think later on, after a couple of years, I think eventually they decided to do it. But obviously, the more identifiable toys I think that they could have marketed at the time was obviously Ren and Stimpy and
Ren and Stimpy. Others. I remember as a kid going into Toys R Us, where like those were the toys that I really remember, where you got to see like the farting Stimpy and you got to see the angry Ren. And yeah, I remember a lot of Ren and Stimpy toys. I actually wanted one, but Mom wouldn't give it to me because she didn't like me watching Ren and Stimpy. And then I remember,
I think a lot of parents didn't want us buying Ren and Stimpy toys. So I don't think you're on your own. Yeah, so
very
that
true.
was I think that was at the beginning of like the whole parental outcry of like, why are these cartoons so violent? So
right. But I think that what Doug was able to showcase on television for a lot of kids is that there was a sense of relatability that would be the influence of a lot of other slice of life cartoons that would come out in the next decade and a half. We talked about this in Arun and Patricia, but for those who want to get a brief discussion about what we said, was that after Doug, we had shows like Arthur and Hey Arnold, Recess, Pepper Ann, The Proud Family, Lloyd in Space, and As Told by Ginger, and then all the way up until All Grown Up, in which like the genre of the slice of life cartoons pretty much died out, because that was when creators became more influenced with anime and with, telling more complex stories and doing a lot more superhero oriented shows like Batman Beyond and X-Men Evolution. So it was definitely going in a different direction. And I remember when I was a teenager and everybody was getting into Invader Zim and I was getting into As Told by Ginger, that I remember somebody was saying, why would I watch a show about people going to school when I myself am going through school? I want to be able to escape whenever I'm watching a show. I don't want to, watch something that I just went through a few hours ago. And I can kind of understand where they're coming from.
Well, I don't know. Like with us, it really depends what you're looking for. Because, like, if you're looking for a character that you feel like you're going to be able to relate with, then As Told by Ginger is going to be far more relatable than Invader Zim.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, going into like Doug, the discussion again, it's like when people look back on it as an adult, it's like, wow, there were so many things that show presented that I missed out the first time, because, when I was going through it, it's like, wow, there was a sense of relatability that I didn't appreciate until I was an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good observation. Like what I've been seeing a lot of people talking about is like they didn't appreciate what they seen as kids until they became adults and looking back on the show. I think that the relatability of Doug going through like trauma and various issues, especially when it comes to like trying to prove to yourself that you're not a loser, I think it's definitely relatable.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the thing. That's why a lot of people got attached to Doug, because he was no, he felt like he was worried about being judged by other people, which a lot of people are, and his imagination obviously ran wild at the same time as well, and so a lot of us were in that position. So when he wanted to escape into being Smash Adams and being Quail Man, we related with that too. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, he basically became someone that you could look at and say, you know what, I'm going through some of those same things. Like I want to pay attention to this character and see where he goes.
Absolutely. How about you, Alex?
Like I said, I feel like it didn't necessarily need to get that big, because it's like, yeah, getting big and getting into deeper issues, there's a place for that. But I think Doug works so well because what I'll give it credit for also kind of staying in its lane. Like, it played to its strengths rather than trying to be something it wasn't.
I guess it does play to its strengths. While Vanessa Coffey, whenever that she talked about the lineup of Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy, she always saw Doug as like the vegetables. The kind of like where you're starting off with your main course meal. It was like your appetizer. You're basically starting off with something nice and wholesome and simple, and then you move over to Rugrats, where it was this plate of spaghetti and meatballs, where it was a lot more chock full of content with like the kids' perspective and the adults' perspective and the crazy, wacky scenarios. And then you had Ren and Stimpy, which was the dessert high up on sugar. So when you look at Doug and you look at the desserts and the vegetables, and you're thinking, kids don't like vegetables. Kids don't want to go over and eat a salad. They want to have the main course. They want to have the dessert. But you need those vegetables in order for you to sustain your body and for you to keep it healthy and keep it intact. And with Doug, you need to have something like a slice of life cartoon to bring a sense of normality and bring yourself grounded and see that, wow, I relate to these characters. I mean, that's why, a lot of slice of life cartoons were really popular around that time, because there wasn't like a show like Doug other than Charlie Brown and Snoopy. And there was a calling for relatability for a lot of kids, going through everyday situations with like passing a test or talking to a cool person or talking to a crush or being able to get the coolest shoes or something like that. It's like they may seem mundane and they seem out of, just like pretty normal, but everybody goes through that. And that's why a lot of people need something like Doug so that they can be able to see themselves in there. And that's why I know a lot of people make the argument that Doug is just a blank slate character that we just insert ourselves into it. But, he does have his own sense of a personality, even though that is a simple one. And, there's a reason why a lot of people really still gravitated to the show. And I guess this is a reason why Disney decided after, Doug ended its run in 65 episodes that they were going to pick it up for the Disney incarnation. So yeah, let's get this out of the way. Let's talk about our thoughts about Disney's Doug. So Alex, I'll leave it to you. You go first.
Well, I actually I've rewatched it. It is on Disney Plus for anybody who's curious and anybody who wants to compare my opinion, but I was taken aback that I did kind of enjoy it. First of all, Disney Doug came out when I was in that when I was in that age where I was beginning to think I was too cool for that sort of thing. But rewatching it, although I don't like it as much as the original Doug, I still enjoy it. Some problems I do have, I feel like they kind of veered away from like I feel like they veered away from their strengths and kind of doubled down on trying to be wacky. Not that Doug wasn't wacky, but I feel like it could get a little. I feel like on Disney Doug they could get a little ham-fisted with it. And I found some of the morals both ham-fit. The morals were just strange. Like, Doug on Nickelodeon had such simple morals, like, your shoes don't matter. But Disney Doug could have some kind of could be both ham-fisted with morals and kind of weird with morals. One that sticks out for me is they did an episode that I straight up remember the commercials for, where the kids all traded houses, and like everybody learns that every character has something hard to live with. And honestly, I feel like they should have just streamlined the moral to Doug realizing that Patty, having this handicapped father, is the one with the hard life, and they kind of just muddled that moral with Skeeter not knowing what fork to use at BB's place and stuff like that.
I felt like they were trying to bring a lot more depth into the story by focusing on the characters, but it just kind of like lost the simplicity of what the morals were trying to be the focus on. I think I remember like one episode that just really infuriated me, and I'm surprised I didn't discuss about it in my old video, but it was the episode where Doug tried to have Boomer over with his grandmother, and Boomer was like a jerk to Doug. Like it's kind of like very mixed message about like Boomer being one of Roger's friends being the jerk.
It was Ned.
Oh, it was Ned. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so Ned was acting like a jerk to Doug. And, there were some moments in which, like, he was being really nice, but then he was being a jerk again. And then he was being really nice, but then he was being a jerk again. It's like, which one is it? I mean, I'm sure if they wanted to tell more of the complicated story about, like, it's maybe we know the reason why Ned was acting like a jerk to Doug, and maybe it would go more in depth about like, it's kind of like a complicated matter. I'm trying to be nice, but they never really go with it after a while. And the moral of it was just really strange, like trying to be patient with people because you don't know what their lives are like or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't have the hatred for that episode you have, but I do agree that was one episode that I found to just be all over the place and not picking a lane in terms of its moral.
Yeah. And then there were some like other strange episodes that I can see what they were trying to do with it, but I don't know, just something about it just felt like it just needed another punch up with the writing. Like the episode where Doug introduces his friends over to his old friend Bobby from Bloatsburg, where he's just like acting like really scatterbrain and kind of like a goof. And then Bobby was like really upset that Doug has just moved on, and they used to be the best of friends, and then Doug tries to tell him, hey, you just be yourself. But in a way, he was kind of being himself, but, being more over the top. So it's like, try to be patient with your friend and let them be themselves or something like that. I don't know. It was complicated.
Okay, so do you want to hear my reasons why I don't think Disney's Doug's all that great?
Go ahead.
Oh my God. I mean, like, where do we start? It's the whole show was pretty much butchered. In my opinion, like they obviously the beats was just like one problem with the breaking them up the beats, and was a problem with the formula. Like Roger Klotz originally was poor, then all of a sudden he became stupidly rich, which I think kind of like ruined his character in a way. And then they basically didn't put any imagination into the the next that version of the theme music. It was just like I can barely remember it. All I can remember is like just the Nickelodeon version of like what it was, and it was just really generic. I mean, like then there was like the how it all came about. Jim Jenkins basically just said, "Oh, Disney just gave me an offer I couldn't refuse." So it's like I sometimes genuinely wonder if Jim Jenkins actually wanted to make this in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand, it's like you want to be able to continue a story based off of your character. And, you have to remember at the time, the formula was either 52 or 65 episodes, and then it would go running on syndication. I mean, it's not like today in which, like, if a show does really, really well, they have hundreds upon hundreds of episodes or even thousands of episodes, and it never ends. So the fact that Disney was saying to Jim, saying, hey, you want to continue the story of Doug, right after he graduated from elementary school and he goes over to middle school, well, we'll give you 65 more episodes, we'll give you a movie, we'll give you merchandise, we'll get your show featured on our Disney attractions. It's like, for Jim, it's like, this is an opportunity that I wanted to do that Nickelodeon will not give to me.
Did he actually make any money out of it though? Because it was like, if I remember, Doug's first movie actually kind of bombed at the box office. I remember, if I recall.
Yeah,
pretty well.
$19.4 million it made in the box office. And I remember the LA Times article were predicting that it was going to make $100 million because that's how much the Rugrats movie made.
Also, on top of that as well, it's 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, you know, enough said. And also, it's a movie that basically, you know, a lot of people didn't want.
I remember being surprised. I don't even remember when I found out that it was actually released theatrically. Like, I am fairly certain that at the time I thought it was direct to video.
That's what it was planned to, that, believe it or not. They were supposed to release it direct to video because there was a lot of if you have like various Disney movies, they would always show on the trailers, it's like, you know, coming straight only to video. And then they release it in the last minute. And I even mentioned this in my video, Is Disney's Doug Really That Bad? That a person who worked at Disney at the time, his name was Joe Roth, and he saw the potential of releasing Doug theatrically when they saw that when, you know, they heard the news that Nickelodeon was releasing the Rugrats movie and it made over $140 million. And they're like, hey, we have a Nickelodeon property. Let's release that into theaters. And, you know, Rebel Taxi even did a really interesting video called How the Rugrats Movie Killed 2D Animation, where, you know, after the release of the Rugrats movie, every single TV show had to have a theatrical movie. Teacher's Pet, Recess, and then you
here's the funny thing about this. I'm not against that. Like, you know, it's like, I mean, like with everything with the Rugrats movies, is like it was actually brought in as a theatrical production. Paramount Pictures, you know, held Nickelodeon's hand throughout the whole process, and like, you know, for better or for worse. And the thing with what Disney and what, you know, all these other, people were doing is that they just said, you know what, let's just take these TV movies and let's just make them into, make them into theatrical movies, which that's not why they were built. That's not the purpose of those movies. Like, you know, if they were really wanted to make something that was as spectacular as the Rugrats movie, they would have said, okay, let's start from scratch. Let's, look and see if the story that we've got is actually, we're worth, obviously putting into the theater. And if not, let's rewrite it again. And then let's redo all the animation and let's do it to that. I mean, the way that some theater, production companies were acting at the time is that, hey, can we do movies on the cheap? Can we do something that's like $8 million in production costs, and can we stick this in and can we make like a ton of money? Which is not how things work.
Unfortunately, it was the Rugrats movie was more of the exception than the rule because.
Well, no, but the Rugrats movie had a significant budget behind it.
No, I know that. I'm just talking about like all the other movies that came out after the Rugrats movie.
But but those movies did not have significant budget behind them. Like,
no,
they
didn't.
No, they didn't. That's the thing. So like, unless you're going to set out to say, hey, we're going to take this property, we're going to shoot it to the moon, we're going to give it like a boatload full of money, and we're going to basically make sure and polish every single aspect of this thing, and then we're going to stick it on the big screen. Like, I'll say this: if you are going to do, say for example, let's say they do the Amphibian movie, or they do the Owl House movie, or like, which would rock. But like, I would say if the feelings go backstage like, oh, we're only going to give you like, a couple of scraps of money and like, whatever you can make for lunch, and then you're going to put this out for like as a 5-course meal for like the Queen of England, and like it's going to be like you'd be in panic mode. Like, that would be absolutely diabolical if they decided to say, hey, we're going to do something like that is supposed to be like, a theatrical, experience. And to keep this in mind, the idea of going to the theater is a theatrical experience. It's supposed to be like, you take you out of the reality that you're currently in and stick you in another reality. Like, I'm pretty sure that all the Marvel, the Avengers Endgame movies were definitely not done on a shoestring budget.
Oh, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. No. And that's basically, I guarantee you, if they did a TV-based property movie today, I guarantee you they'd have to stick $100 million or stick something really stupid amount of money in front of it to say, hey, we're going to get this ready for, a $1 billion box office.
Yeah, I mean, like today's equivalent I can think of on the top of my head is like the My Little Pony movie. The Loud House was supposed to be released in theaters, but due to COVID, it was released on Netflix. There was also, Steven Universe was, also released in theaters a couple of times, and so was Regular Show the movie. With Steven Universe, they did the karaoke version, and with Regular Show, that was supposed to be kind of like one of the last things that they did right before that was done. And from what I understand, they're going to be doing a Gumball movie, and they're going to be doing a We Bare Bears movie. So they're still doing it today. It's just that they know that they cannot just rely on doing like, hey, let's just take 3 episodes of a TV show and put them together and make it into a movie. We're going to get that Simpsons joke about like, why am I paying money when I could just see this for free on TV?
And by the way, still let you guys know, like, things like this is just something that happens in the past. They're still doing it again. Like, Paw Patrol the movie only had like $26 million to work with.
Yeah, and they're making a boatload of money.
Oh, well, to be fair, actually, I'm just having a look at that. Actually, what was because I'm actually looking for the box office for it, and because I'm not too sure, maybe I'm about to be proved wrong here. So it's like, am I about to eat my words as I Google this? To be honest, it's only made $61 million at the moment.
Yeah, but it came out like a few days ago. That's the most amount of money that I've heard, in a while in terms of like, oh yeah, this movie made a ton of money. So
okay, let's see. Like, I want to see the final tally, and then we'll see if it's actually worth the $26 million to make or not. So I mean, they've already tripled their budget. So yeah, okay, that's fine. But I mean, like, let's see where this goes. But I mean, my whole ethos is that if you are going to take something and you're basically going to stick it on the big screen, and you are going to want to give people the theatrical experience that they are expecting to, and they're going to have everyone raving about it, and it's and everything like that, stick a significant amount of money about it. If you're sticking Doug's first movie or Hey Arnold the movie money in front of something expecting it to be good, you're out of your freaking mind.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing, like, I could see where they were coming from in terms of making this into a big theatrical movie, because and like toward the halfway point of the series, they were introducing about the monster of Lucky Duck Lake, and it was built up throughout the series, and people were wondering, what does the monster of Lucky Duck Lake looks like? Because Skeeter was obsessed with it, the AV Club kids were obsessed with it, Doug was obsessed with it, Roger was obsessed with it, everybody wanted to know about it. And so we finally got the movie, and the end result about what the monster looked like was a massive disappointment.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, but that's just one of like many disappointments with this show, Disney's Doug, and like it's just. Oh, by the way, first of all, it wasn't actually called Disney's Doug; it's called Brand Spanking New Doug.
Yes, it was.
Which is like, yeah. So apparently, for some reason, they gave Doug 9 strands of hair, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg, really. Like, also, they basically got their own version of Dill, which was like Cleopatra Dirtbike Funny. Which is like, why would you call a character that? Like, there was that too.
I mean, I know. I mean, here's the thing. Like, if you remember from the Christmas episode, which nowhere near as good as the Nickelodeon version. Anyway, so in that episode, Doug and Judy were making jokes about it. It's like, because Doug wanted a dirt bike for Christmas, and Judy was saying Offset, well, when she was looking at his Christmas list, and Doug was saying, oh, I'm just coming up with a list of baby names, and so then when she read it, it's like, oh, you want a dirt bike? Even boys will make fun of him. And then she said, well, I prefer Cleopatra. And I guess the parents were like, yeah, let's just name our kid that.
Yeah, it's oh my god, why would you do that to you? I mean, I guess it's not as bad as what Elon Musk called his kid, but I mean, like, it's yeah.
Or you remember that couple? I forget what the couple was, but they named their son Pilot Inspector.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah. Well, I guess I probably don't know those worst. If we were staying in cartoon land, I think Mandark was called Sue. So I think.
I mean, fair enough, but still, I think that. With Disney's Doug, I mean, I mean, there were some episodes I feel that were justifiably sound when it came to like, okay, the show is not that bad. Like, I did like the episodes where it focused on the other characters. I mean, the Patty episodes, like Patty's Dad Dilemma, where it focuses more about Patty and her father, and Miss Crystal being the stepmother. I felt that was definitely a justifiably good episode.
Also,
go
ahead.
Scoring the episodes, that episode alone probably like raised the curve drastically.
Yes.
Also, why did they close down the Hunger Burger?
Well, here's the story about this. So if you watch the first episode, Fat Jack, who was the owner of the trailer parks that Roger and his mom were living in, he made a whole bunch of money when Mr. Bluff came by and bought the land because the middle school that they were supposed to go to was taken down by termites. And so BB pointed out into this random place, which was where the trailers were, and she said, I want to build a school where the trailers are because they're gross and icky. And so he decided, okay, I'm going to buy the land. And so while he bought the land from Fat Jack and the trailers were taken down, he decided to buy the Honker Burger, and he decided to call it Shea Honk. Yes, that is exactly what happened. And then because that Mrs. Klotz still owned the land for her property and it was going to be smack dab in the middle of the school, Mr. Bluff paid her so that they could be able to move out. And that is how Roger and his family got rich.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's just like in the first episode, they basically much ruined the show. It's amazing.
I mean, I did even mention that the first episode is one of the worst things about Disney's Doug. Like I said, I made a video about it, so go watch it.
By the way, I'm not alone in this. Billy West has categorically said he can't watch the show.
Yeah, that's very true. So if you've seen in various videos and interviews where Billy West talks about Disney's Doug, he does not like it. He just talks about like how, there's a perfect opportunity for a genuine moment, and then, the person who played as Doug just didn't exactly deliver it very well. So that
was a problem I had.
Yeah, and this is a stupid reason too. It's like, oh, Disney didn't want to purchase, didn't want to have Billy West in the show because he was getting too expensive. It's like, I mean, I understand that Billy West was getting a lot more work after Doug, but I mean, you're Disney, for crying out loud. I'm sure that you could afford Billy West.
Some things will surprise you. Like, what was the state of Disney television at that time?
I mean, Disney television was, if we want to talk about like the Disney afternoon block, I mean, this was around the same time where we had like the Mighty Ducks animated series.
Yeah, I think, I think around about that time, wasn't the Disney afternoon being kind of phased out because of like poor ratings at that point?
Yes, and then we went over to a new set of shows, which was, from what I remember, the Disney Saturday morning block, where they had like 101 Dalmatians, they had Recess, they had Pepper Ann. So yeah, the Disney afternoon block was phasing away, and then the Disney Saturday morning block was coming in. So yeah, Disney's Doug was definitely at a transitional period.
Yeah, because I think around about that time, because also the Disney Channel was taking more prevalence at that point, and then also Disney Channel was branching out because they had Toon Disney, they had Disney XD, they had various other ones, and it was at the point where ABC, I think, were also nixing the idea of airing Disney shows because they had their own channels to kind of like be on.
Yeah, so I mean, this was around the time in which when Disney bought ABC. This would have been around the same time.
Yeah. So at the same time, it just would have been at the point where, well, we got this channel already. Imagine how funny is it now that even Disney Channel itself is now no longer going to be long for this world, and everyone's going to be tuning into Disney Plus.
Yeah, I know. I just read a report from Disney Philippines saying that they're no longer going to have Disney Channel anymore, and everything's going to be going over to Disney Plus. So yeah,
well, they've done it here in the UK. All the Disney channels are gone.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean, slowly, all the Disney Channel blocks are going to be faded away, and then everybody's going to have to watch their stuff on Disney Plus. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what Ida said in the Owl House. Nobody watches Crystal Balls anymore. It's all about streaming. Yeah, I mean, that's where we are in the future. I mean, streaming is how we got Disney's Doug in the first place. I mean, you have to remember that, other than like a handful of VHS tapes and maybe some books, we didn't get like a complete release of Disney's Doug until Disney Plus came out. It's like, that is unbelievable. We've had like over a decade where we had no complete episodes of Disney's Doug, and now we finally have it.
You're like, yeah. Oh, hey, Mickey, I see you digging in the grave again. Oh, no, don't dig up that corpse.
Oh, geez, no.
Good grief. So in my opinion, just some things are just better off left. I guess maybe if people are curious, I guess they can check out Disney's Doug on Disney Plus, but it's you're not missing much.
Well, that's actually a good segment, because I want to talk about the last thing that Jim wanted to do when, if you remember 2016, that was when Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie was announced. And he was interviewed by Entertainment Weekly about okay, with Disney's, with Doug, celebrating his 25th anniversary, and with the announcement of Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie, do you ever see yourself bringing back Doug in some way, shape, or form?
I mean, it's in regards to Doug coming back. I mean, it would be interesting, if they did reboot the show, would they obviously be radically different from where it was before? Unfortunately, it probably will be end up being in 3D too, which I don't particularly think is going to be great. But also interested to see if would Disney, would it be Disney that want to bring it back? Would it be Nickelodeon want to bring it back? It's interesting to see where the first, if there was a reboot, where the first incarnation would end up being.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the Rugrats reboot, and I gotta be honest, pretty much until you mentioned like 3D reboot, I had legit forgotten about that. Like that show was not occupying my brain. I watched one episode. I did not enjoy it. I did not like the way they made the characters sound. I feel like they kind of veered away from pretty much everything that made the original show work. Like they turned Grandpa from like a funny, cantankerous character into a hippie, which was basically the diametric opposite of what made that character funny.
Yeah, well, I think the reason that I think somewhere down the line, I think we should probably do a casual chat of like the new Rugrats and talk about that in more depth. But but in regards to the Rugrats, I mean, like the reason I didn't see a reason why they had to reboot that show besides obviously, oh hey, money and eyeballs. It's everything I think that could potentially be done with the show has already been done. I mean, like you look at what happened with the preschool days episode. Like they went for 3 episodes and then they just stopped it. It was getting tired. So I mean, so for the Rugrats, I just see there was no reason to reboot the show besides obviously, it was just name value alone. But I mean, for Doug, in regards to Doug, I mean, like I don't know, like there's still potential, I think, in regards to them to say that, oh hey, let's do a modern variation of this show, and let's see, how it would all play out. Like I'd be appreciative if they didn't follow the Disney formula. Like they kind of look at the Nickelodeon aspects of the show and say, hey, this is the way to go, and this, if we want to reboot it, then go with that grain. But in regards to be the ending of the same as the Rugrats, there's part of me that believe it actually wouldn't. I think there's something that they potentially could do more with Doug than they could with the Rugrats, because Rugrats been done to death. Doug, on the other hand, we've not seen it in the last good decade or so. So
yeah. Anyway, so as I was saying before, so Jim wanted to bring back Doug, and he wanted to bring back Doug for at least one more story. He mentioned it in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, saying that he had this one last story where Doug and Skeeter were off in college and they were roommates together, and Judy was performing in off Broadway plays, and he and Patty wouldn't be together because they would be separated and doing their own things, and everybody was just like living their lives. And then finally, it kind of like closes off with like a school reunion over at BB Bluff Middle School. So I think that the fact that Jim wanted to tell one more story, and unfortunately he can't do that because Disney owns the rights to Jumbo Pictures, and Disney has like no interest in bringing back Doug, which makes a lot of sense because they're already steeped in money with their Marvel and their Star Wars stuff. So it's like, why even bring something back like Doug?
Well, in that case, then why hold on to it?
I have no idea. I mean, you know how Disney is. They want to buy studios and then they just want to like hold on to it because they need to. It's like the whole Blue Sky situation all over again. It's like, why do you need to buy Blue Skies and shut them down, Disney? So yeah, it's complicated.
So but I mean, here we are, and that's the sad thing about the way that Jumbo Pictures has kind of gone. Like the fact that Doug has unfortunately kind of like just been frozen in state, really. That he's had this really awful bring back, and now it's just kind of like frozen in time, and we're never likely going to see it again.
Yeah, we're never most likely, unless Disney changes their minds, we're never going to see Doug again. I mean, we're seeing Rugrats.
No, like this is the thing, like they're going like, we're in the superhero things at the minute, but trends change, and so Disney no doubt will want to keep things fresh and keep eyeballs on the screen. So maybe somewhere down the line, they'll have a look. Oh, hey, we have this Doug property. Maybe we should probably do something with this.
I think that
it could happen.
I think that maybe 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been possible because we were in a different phase of animation where everybody was into like the wacky cartoons or the dramatic cartoons. But I think nowadays we have a lot more slice of life cartoons than we ever did. Like we have The Loud House, we have Craig of the Creek, and we have Hilda, and we have various other cartoons that are very more...
Big City Greens.
Yeah, Big City Greens is another one. So yeah, we have a lot more slice of life cartoons now than we did about 10 years ago, where everybody was like trying to focus on, being funny or being dramatic or something like that. So I think that Doug, if they were to be released today, I think it'll stand a chance.
Yeah. So, but you know, but until then, like I would just say, if you can get a hold of the Nickelodeon version, definitely watch it.
Yeah, it's on Paramount Plus, so you can go check it out, and it's on
That's
DVD.
interesting. Like, you know, so would the fact that he's got on Paramount Plus and the fact that Disney owned the rights to it, I mean, like, how does that work?
Okay, so Nickelodeon owns their version of Doug, and Disney owns their version of Doug. It's stupidly complicated. You're absolutely right, but it's true. Like, if you want to watch the Nickelodeon version, it's on Paramount Plus. If you want to watch the Disney version, it's on Disney Plus. If you want to like purchase the series on DVD, you can do so with the Nickelodeon version, but they are extremely rare nowadays because it's out of print. And then there's even a Nickelodeon. There's even a vinyl record of Nickelodeon's Doug, if you can believe it. And if you want to listen to the entire soundtrack of Nickelodeon's Doug, you can do so on YouTube because Dan Sawyer posted it on his channel. So yeah, it's more, but here's the thing, Doug doesn't have any, Nickelodeon's Doug has no merchandise. They only have the VHS tapes where it's cobbled with other Nicktoons, and that's all we ever got of it. Vanessa Coffey still has a prototype of the Nickelodeon Doug that was supposed to be released, but never did. And so if you want to see how Disney's Doug was in terms of its merchandise, there's a lot of it. There's the dolls, there's the books, there's the performance series, there's the performance show that was featured on the Disney parks, and then of course there's obviously Disney's Doug, there's Doug's first movie. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a strange anomaly. It's like Nickelodeon's Doug was always seen as like, third banana compared to like the huge success of Rugrats and the critical groundbreaking achievements of Ren and Stimpy. And then you have Disney's Doug, which was kind of like, oh, it's just another puddle in this, it's just another drip in this huge puddle that we have in terms of slice of life cartoons, where we have Recess, we have Pepper Ann, we have Lloyd in Space, we have Fillmore, and it just didn't really like stick out compared to all the other shows that came out at the time. So it's like, where do we go from here? Do we go for more of the, Nickelodeon version where it was, we're looking back on it, it's a bit rough around the edges, but a lot of people remember it? Or do we go for the more cleaner, more refined Disney version where it was a lot more marketable, but not a lot of people even like it?
Yeah, I think you stick with the Nickelodeon version. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I do too. And, I've even seen some people give arguments that the Nickelodeon version was a bit too rough around the edges when it came to like their lines and their pencil drawings, which
I hate that criticism. I really do. That was a, I actually do like the original Rugrats, and I actually do like the original Doug. It's a bit rough around the edges. Yeah, of course it was. It was a different time.
Yeah.
It's not like today when everything's through a computer.
It's very true. Yeah. I mean, you have to remember that everything was like drawn by hand, and like it was put into, the cell scanner, and then, any rough drafts that happened, that's the way it was. And, you had to, after sending it over to South Korea, if there's like any mistakes, I mean, you had to just stick with it. So you couldn't just, and also, every single bit of frames were drawn individually. It's not like today where you can just get a tablet on your computer and you can be able to have all the characters in their set positions, and you can be able to just draw it from there. I mean, I know that they still do drawings of storyboards and various cells today. I mean, I've seen Ian Jones Cordy on OKKO where he showed off his drawings of OK and Enid and various characters where he drew it by hand, but a lot more, but for the most part today, a lot of people do computers, and it is more efficient, it is more polished, it is more quicker. But a lot of people say that the charm of shows that were from 30 years ago is kind of lost because they don't have the roughness or the pencil drawings. It's kind of like the argument about like the Xerox movement from Disney. It's like, a lot of people did like, the pencil drawings, even though that this was at a time when Disney was at a low budget. But then there's some people who were like, I didn't really care for it because it wasn't as clean and refined as something like Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella. But I think it's like an art. I think it's an aesthetics thing. You either love and appreciate it or you don't like it. It's either one of the two. But I don't know. I mean, I think that for Doug, I think it works for what it was. I mean, the sketchiness made it look like it came from like a comic strip series, kind of like Peanuts. And I think that's what Jim was going for.
Like that's kind of how Doug, perceived, a lot of his creativity, like, the Quail Man comics and everything like that. So like that had a charm to it. So you can't tell me that people don't like Quail Man.
I mean, remember if you recall, I even mentioned this in my video that they were supposed to do a animated spin-off series off of Quailman, but that never happened. So that's how
Yeah,
we got
that
13
would have
episodes.
been
That's how
that
we
would
got
have
13.
yeah, I don't know about it having a spin-off of Quail Man. That would have been, yeah. I mean, like Quail Man shorts, like and also specific episodes. Yeah, definitely you can do that, but in like in segues. But as a whole entire show, I don't know. Like did we? I mean, wasn't the Tick out that particular time?
Yes, it
So
was
like,
actually.
yeah. So I think it's. I think people would kind of can be comparing it to the Tick in a way, kind of like hey, this is a guy like pretending like he's a superhero and like he's just he's playing on all these superhero tropes that we're all aware of, and so I don't know. I think it probably would have been maybe appropriate for the time, but I think it wouldn't have stood out. I don't think.
Yeah, they also wanted to do a spin-off series off Judy as well.
Oh, that would have been interesting, actually.
I would have liked that, actually. I think that a spin-off series off of Judy where she was going to college, I would have really enjoyed that. I mean, like I said, Judy was one of my favorite characters, and she had an arc in Disney's Doug where, she was in her last years of high school and she was going over to college. So I would have liked to have seen that.
Yeah, it would have to have been more adult. Like, mind you, then guess what we'd be comparing it to?
Daria.
Yep. Where animated spin-offs go to die. R.I.P. the Patakis.
Anyway, so yeah, I think that we're going all over the place. Let's just wrap things up. So, final thoughts on Doug.
Yeah, Doug was one of the original staples. If a lot of shows would not be here today if it wasn't for Doug, obviously writing in his journal and having all these adventures and obviously going through what what all boyhood basically goes through. So he basically was the one of the founding fathers. And if we had a Mount Rushmore for Nickelodeon, Doug would definitely be up on there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How about you, Alex?
Well, it's one of my favorite shows. I mean, it's one of those things where even if other shows are better, and even if other shows, even if other shows are technically better, and even if stuff like Hey Arnold even technically did this show's job better, like I just find the charm factor just makes me come back to the show no matter what. It's definitely a show that years and years from now I'll definitely see myself coming back to.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Like, it's hard to be the best when you're the first, I would say, because look at the Flintstones. A lot of people say that the Flintstones is boring now because, there's been other animated shows that are just kind of expanded that. But if it wasn't for the Flintstones demonstrating that you can do animation on television, like instead of pay a nickel to go to the theater, to go watch a Looney Tunes short. That was the these shows that people, some people look down upon. Actually, when you really look further deep down, they were trendsetters. They were the staples that basically said, yeah, you can do this and you can make it successful. And this is the formula of how to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think Doug is definitely a big part in in Nickelodeon history, if not cartoon history.
Absolutely. And for certain critics who castrate Doug and saying, Doug is irrelevant, is a boring show, and you shouldn't even watch it, I think that you should definitely give Doug a fair chance. Like, you have to understand, you have to put it into perspective. This was many years before we have the shows of today. This was before Big City Greens. This was before The Loud House. This was before Clarence. This was before Hey Arnold. This was before Pepper Ann. This is, yes, the Peanuts came out afterwards, and that was the only foundation we had. So you have to put it into context that, for a lot of people, this was all they had in terms of relatable slice of life stories about a kid going through everyday problems. And there's still some things about it that still hold up. Like the situations are still incredibly relatable and grounded. The characters, even though that, face value, they're one note, but they're still really memorable characters, and they all have their unique quirks and personalities. The music is definitely really unique for its time. The art design, even though that it may seem rough for some people, actually has a bit of a charm to it. And also, just the fact that it was able to be relatable for a lot of people saying, yeah, I want to be just like Doug, or I want to be, I want to have a life that was very similar to his. It just goes to show you about how much the show was just a revolutionary product for its time. So I would suggest give the show a fair chance, watch it on Paramount Plus, own it on DVD, and, just put on the mindset that, this is where a lot of these slice of life cartoons first got started. And, it may not be like a major success compared to like Rugrats or Ren and Stimpy, but it's still very important for its own unique reasons.
Well, I mean, the fact that where we are today with animation, and we have so many, kid protagonists who we can, walk and run with. It's in a way, it already, you can tell from that metric, it already is a massive success.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
credit to Jim Jenkins for, putting this together and entertaining us with a really great show when various other shows weren't willing to entertain in this way. So kudos to him.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that is it for this discussion about Doug and Casual Chats. So, Arun, Alex, thank you so much for coming on by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, plug and promote your stuff.
You can listen to the Arun Mehta Show on arunmehta.co.uk. If you can also listen on various podcast shows and podcast networks as well. If you find a podcast network that I don't shout out and that carries the Arun Mehta Show, or even Arun and Patricia, please let me know and I will shout them out. So yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Arun Mehta Show, ARUNMEHTASHOW. So you can follow me there. If you want to ask me a question on Tumblr, it's arunmehta.tumblr.com. And if you want to find me on Instagram, it's also Arun Mehta Show as well. Thank you.
You can find me on Twitter, Alex the D. You can find me on Instagram, DeCourv. That's ADECOURV, like the first few letters of my last name. My show Pinhead is on Amazon Prime. I recently completed my first movie, Science Boys High School Reunion. You can see trailers and clips of that on YouTube right now.
All right. As for me, you can check out my work at oldschoollane.net. I'm on YouTube, youtube.com/oldschoollane, facebook.com/oldschoollane. I'm on Twitter at Patty_B_Miranda. You can check out my podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Radio Public, all those places. New episodes of Casual Chats and Old School Lane interviews will go there first, and then they'll go up on a few days on YouTube. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. Let us know in the comments below about your fondest memories about Doug. What was your favorite episode? Who were your favorite characters? What were your favorite moments? What were your favorite lines? What are your thoughts on Disney's Doug? Do you think it was worse or better than the Nickelodeon incarnation? What did you think of the movie? And do you think that Doug would work if they were to reboot it or bring it back for 2021? So that's it, everybody. Hope to see you around soon and take care.